friends. Welcome to today's webinar hosted by Bridge to Success Educational Program. We are delighted today to welcome once again Dr. Nizam Misaghi, who is an Iranian-American physician specializing in anesthesiology. He's born in the United States and raised in Iran. He faced much educational challenges in Iran, and then as a result, family was prompted to leave Iran when he was 18 years old to pursue higher education. Dr. Misaghi's resume is very celebrated with a lot of accomplishments. He is involved not only as a physician in Phoenix, Arizona, but also he chairs the board of directors for the Iran Human Rights Documentation Center, and he has authored multiple articles focusing on various topics, including human behavior, social psychology, cognitive biases, as well as other topics. We are very honored to have him once again for these webinars. And today's topic of his presentation shall be perfectionism and its consequences. Welcome, Dr. Misaghi, and we are all ears to hear from you.
Thank you so very much to Bridge to Success for the wonderful introduction, very undeservedly so. If the friends would please mute themselves, because I hear a lot of echo, it would help with the quality of the voice, and I would much appreciate it. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for your invitation a second time. I had some scheduling misunderstandings that I appreciate Bridge to Success rectifying for me because I'd confused 2025 with 2024, and so they set me straight with 2026 versus 25. At any rate, I'm much elated to be here, and all the issues have been resolved. And so the topic for today is perfectionism. For the friends who wish to have this talk or something similar to it in Persian, I do have it on my YouTube channel, which is under my name, in Persian. But today's presentation will be in English at the request of Bridge to Success for those who wish to have it in English as well. The focus of the talk today is on perfectionism, and perfectionism at the outset appears to be a virtue. It appears to be a very positive thing, that if we were to say somebody is perfectionist, the usual thing that comes to mind is this person is wonderful, is doing the best that they can. And it would seem that you could list perfectionism as one of your qualities or strengths. Today's presentation casts a bit of a shadow and a doubt on our understanding of whether perfectionism is indeed a positive human attribute. And I would tell you that by the end of the presentation, you will understand why we may think that is positive, and then why we would come to the conclusion that is not such a positive attribute, and understand what we need to replace it with in our own lives, and how it may affect us personally. It may affect us in our intimate and close and emotional relationships, and how it may affect us in society. When I was training in anesthesiology at the University of Virginia years ago, one of my mentors always had a saying. He said, the enemy of good is better. And at that time, I didn't quite understand. I said, well, better always sounds superior to good. Why would he ever say that? Because if something was good enough, sometimes it was best to stick with it. Because if you try to improve it and make it better, sometimes it would backfire and you would lose the good status that the current situation had. So with that in mind, I'm going to open the presentation for today. Perfectionism is a double-edged sword. and we're going to talk about where these two edges are. Let me begin with a story that's rather a cultural proverb. This one is in Japanese tradition, where in Japanese aesthetics, there is a beautiful concept called wabi sabi, and it means finding beauty in imperfection, in the cracks of the flaws of life. Imagine a broken vase, a broken bowl that is repaired with gold, and that adds beauty to this vase, even though it may not appear perfect anymore. Or to the weathered texture of an old wooden door that tourists will pass by and they take picture of how this door has weathered so beautifully. Or anything that may seem old, that we have such a fascination with. It may have imperfections. It may not be perfect. It may not be in its original shiny presentation, yet there is a particular charm and draw and beauty to it that captivates its audience. So these are seen as precious, not because they're flawless, but precisely because they have imperfections, that they tell a story, typically in time, culture, and tradition. Now, contrast that with our modern culture. We edit every photo, we smooth every wrinkle, we Photoshop or airbrush every pimple that we may have. We use filters. We try to erase every blemish, and we try to create an illusion of perfection. That is not real life, of course. But if we wanted to post something on social media, we are going to post what appears to us the most perfect presentation of that picture. But let me ask you this question. Are we chasing a standard that doesn't actually exist? Perfectionism is often praised in job interviews, on resumes, even in casual conversations. People say, well, I'm a perfectionist. And it sounds like a virtue. But beneath that label often lies fear, rigidity, insecurity, and fragility. So, this is where I want to make an important distinction. Perfectionism is not the same as pursuit of excellence. Perfectionism is rooted in fear. What kind of fear? Fear of judgment, fear of shame, fear of rejection. Whereas excellence or pursuit of excellence is rooted in curiosity, mastery, and growth. You're likely familiar with Brene Brown, the author of many books and many presentations online. I personally love her work, especially her latest, the one about venturing into the wilderness. And so Brene Brown, she says perfectionism is a shield to protect ourselves from shame, blame, or judgment. But here's the problem. Shields don't just block arrows. Shields also block connection, vulnerability, and creativity. So we're going to delve more into what is the issue with perfectionism. But before we do that, let's define it. What actually is perfection? Psychologists have a definition for this. They've studied perfectionism for decades. And Frost and colleagues in 1990 identified traits such as excessive concern over mistakes, doubts about one's own actions, and unrealistically high standards. These are not simply ambition. Perfectionism is different than ambition because ambition allows for a particular process to take place, whereas perfectionism wants you to be at optimal performance from the get-go. These are the problems of perfectionism because it comes with rigidity, with self-criticism, which stands in opposition to self-compassion, and with anxiety, and often with depression as well. So in 1991, Hewitt and Flett in the psychological literature described three kinds of perfectionism. The first kind is described as self-oriented perfectionism. This is when the inner voice constantly demands flawlessness. Flawlessness does not allow for any mistake whatsoever. Picture a student who rewrites the same essay 10 times and every time crumbles up the paper, throws it away into the trash can because he's just not happy with it. Imagine another example. You may know Chopin, very celebrated composer. And Chopin was very self-critical, and he wrote many masterpieces that we never heard because he would crumble them up and throw them in the trash can and say, this is just simply not good enough. And the world is deprived of that beautiful creativity because he was like that. As a matter of fact, he had several unpublished works that he had written in his will that they are never to be published. His family, against his wish, published them, and they became some of the most iconic works of Chopin that we know today. So imagine, self-oriented perfectionism says you cannot make a single mistake. You have to be flawless. And that is the first kind of perfectionism. The second kind is other-oriented perfectionism. This is when we demand impossible standards from others. Imagine a manager or a boss who nitpicks every line of a report, leaving the team exhausted. Somebody like that, a lot of times people spoke of Steve Jobs as having been a very difficult boss at Apple because he demanded such perfection that it was difficult, and often employees would cry and leave meetings because it was very difficult for them to thrive in that environment. And then the third kind of perfectionism is socially prescribed perfectionism. This is when you believe others will reject you unless you're perfect. As a young professional, for example, one may feel terrified of presenting their writing or their presentation because everyone will see my mistakes, and they just fear the ostracism of a community, therefore they won't. And this also goes with some of the situations with honor crimes that happens in especially in Eastern and especially Middle Eastern cultures, where there is this idea of chastity as this perfectionist idea that one has to be pure. And unfortunately, these are disproportionately leveled on women. And so when this young female, the young girl of a family starts conversing simply with somebody else in a neighborhood, you would find this father who's overcome with honor, because honor has to be guided by perfection. It cannot be tarnished with a simple conversation of a daughter with the opposite sex. He will go do the unthinkable to that daughter. So there are real social consequences when you think of something as so pure, as so flawless, as something that has to be protected at all costs, that sometimes this may lead to violence in societies. So culture plays a big role in this kind of perfectionism. In collectivist cultures and societies, socially prescribed perfectionism is very common as people feel pressure to live up to family or community expectations and standards. In more individualist cultures, self-oriented perfectionism seems to dominate. The drive to be unique, flawless, or to be the best. Whereas in cultures, for example, like much of the Middle East, you have the socially prescribed perfectionism that demands you to behave a certain way. But here's the paradox. Perfectionism might push people to work hard, but it doesn't make them happier, and it does not make them more successful necessarily. In fact, it often does the opposite. There's a large study by Curran and Hill in Psychological Bulletin published in 2019, it found that the rates of perfectionism in young adults have risen dramatically over the last 3 decades. But instead of producing more achievement, this rise has been tied to higher levels of anxiety and depression and burnout. So imagine the whole spectrum of mood disorders that have increased because of the rise in perfectionism. There are consequences for the individual who considers himself or herself a perfectionist. What actually happens to people who fall into this perfectionism trap. Let's look at a few key consequences. The first consequence is mental health costs, and I already mentioned the mood disorders and the burnout. Perfectionism is very strongly linked with depression, social anxiety, eating disorders, and even suicidality. Imagine somebody who thinks that their body is not perfect and they resort to eating disorders because they want to shape this body the way that the magazines would present as a perfect image of a person or of a body. Imagine somebody who becomes so obsessed with plastic surgery and cosmetic surgery to change everything about their face or their body because they want to conform to a particular image that they consider perfect. This is prescribed as standards of beauty for them. And if they are unsuccessful in doing this, it may push them to anxiety, depression, or even suicidality. There was one study by Flett and colleagues in 2014 that found that college students with high socially prescribed perfectionism had double the risk of suicidal thoughts. So perfectionism isn't just a potentially negative thing. Perfectionism can actually claim lives. Think of the medical student who gets top grades but lives in constant fear of failure. On the outside, this student looks very successful, maybe the envy of the classroom. But on the inside, they're consumed by panic attacks before every exam, the sleepless nights, and the anxiety that precedes every exam. And success on paper may not equate with the turmoil in the reality of the inner self of that student. The second problem with perfectionism is paralysis and procrastination. Procrastination is often mislabeled as laziness, but in many cases, it's actually fear of imperfection that causes us to procrastinate. Take the writer who spends months polishing the first chapter of a novel but never finishes that book. The need for perfection keeps the project frozen. Sirois in 2016 showed that perfectionists procrastinate more, and this leads to missed opportunities and more stress. The third problem with perfectionism is stifling creativity and innovation. There was a study at Harvard in 1996, penned by Amabile, that says the pressure of evaluation significantly reduces creativity. When people fear judgment, they produce safer, less original work. Artists who endlessly self-censor, they end up repeating what's already been done by other artists. So they don't seem so original anymore. Instead of daring to innovate, innovation requires risk, and perfectionism suffocates risk-taking. I'm going to tell you the story of someone whose name you've heard, but I'm going to tell you the name at the end. A very young boy is growing up in the city of Barcelona. His father, Mr. Ruiz, is a famous painter, very realistic painter, mind you. And the son starts learning how to paint, gets the canvas, gets the oil on canvas, and the father very quickly realizes that this son is a genius. The son is outdoing the father in his skill, in his realism. But there was so much realism work in all of Europe. The son grew a bit discontent with his father because the father would force him to go through hours of lessons to perfect his art. And the son outdid the father. He created so many incredible pieces that now sit in a museum in Barcelona. And because the son didn't quite like his father and all of the pushing that the father had done to the perfection that the father wanted in every piece, when he became more famous, he took the maiden name of his mother. And that's why he's not known as Ruiz. And the reason that he's known is because he ventured away from these perfectionist ideas and started creating what appeared to be bizarre sketches of humans from different dimensions and their eyes in one place and their bodies in another, everything twisted. He gave rise to such incredible works as Guernica. His name was Pablo Picasso. Pablo Picasso ventured away from doing the routine and the mundane and created an entire genre within the art of painting called Cubism. And for that, he became world famous. If you ever venture to Barcelona, go for a visit in the Pablo Picasso Museum, and you will see the progression of his works from the very basic, classical, safe works to the works that became so creative and so incredible. There's more than 5,000 artifacts in that museum. But his story underscores the fact that when this socially prescribed perfectionism by his father, if he stayed within it, we may have never known his name. He would have just been like another European painter of his time in the 20th century. But the reason we know him is because he chose to depart from perfectionism. The fourth problem with perfectionism is physical health risks. Perfectionism doesn't just live in your head. The body does not escape the chronic perfectionism that happens in your brain. Chronic perfectionism is associated with a lot of bodily problems, such as insomnia, difficulty falling asleep or maintaining sleep, high cortisol, which is the stress hormone of the body, and cardiovascular problems. Professionals who ruminate over mistakes, they report poorer sleep quality. This was shown in 2002, a study by Lund. And in 2012, there was another study that shows perfectionism predicted higher rates of hypertension, high blood pressure, over a 7-year period. So perfectionism is not only hard on your mind, it's also very hard on your body. It's not just in your head. It lives in your body and your heart, in your heart rate, in your blood pressure, in your sleepless nights. So let's talk a little bit about consequences for loved ones who may be in relationships with perfectionist people. Perfectionism doesn't stop with the individual. It spills over into relationships. It's not just bothering you internally, but it's going to be contagious. So family and romantic relationships. Perfectionism in families presents in different ways. Imagine perfectionist families and parents may not mean harm, but the message that they send to their sons and daughters may sound like this: you are only lovable if you succeed. That the love is now contingent on a certain standard of perfection. That if you don't do it this way, we are going to take some of the love off this table. This creates conditional self-worth in children. This leads to anxiety in children. It leads to rebellion. Picture a parent who demands straight A's from their sons or daughters. If your report card doesn't show straight A's, you're not welcome in this house. A child may start hiding their mistakes. They may start cheating on exams because they want to please the parents. They may develop stress-related stomach problems. So there was research in 2005 by SENS that showed parental perfectionism predicts shame and self-criticism in adolescence. So if the parent is a perfectionist and they want to have it be contagious within their family, it is truly going to be just that. It is going to affect adversely their own children. And their own children will either become perfectionists like them with the host of problems that comes with perfectionism, or they may become rebellious, or they may simply leave the house. And now you're posting flyers in the neighborhood about missing children because they simply may not be able to rise to the level of your expectations. The second place where perfectionism spills over into is the workplace dynamics. At work, perfectionist leaders can destroy psychological safety. Google's Project Aristotle in 2015 found that number one factor in high performing teams was psychological safety. People have to feel safe and secure in the workplace. Psychologically, not just physically safe, but they need to feel psychologically safe. The belief that it's okay to make mistakes is central to psychological safety. That you're not going to lose your job if you made a mistake, that the team is there to help you learn from the mistakes so they don't happen again and we can move on from them. The focus is on the process. Perfectionist leadership erodes that safety, the psychological safety, and it leaves the teams fearful, risk averse, disengaged, and guess what? They don't innovate, they don't become as creative as they could be because they always live under the shadow of fear. The third place where perfectionism can spill over into is friendships and social life. Even in friendships, perfectionists often hide their true selves. They project only a polished image, just like how you would do with this picture with a filter or this picture that's been enhanced with AI so it looks just so incredible. They just hide their own reality even within social interactions, which makes the social interactions less genuine. When we never show our flaws, we never allow others to know us deeply. Everybody will only have a superficial understanding of you as a friend, as a colleague, as a love partner. Think of a friend who always looks very well put together but never shares their struggles. They may be admired, but rarely truly connected. So social connection is completely fading in the environment of perfectionism, and we thrive on social connection. We should also talk about the consequences of perfectionism for society. On a larger scale, perfectionism shapes entire cultures. A perfectionist society fosters fear-based compliance, fragile self-worth, and low innovation. Notice that the innovation and creativity permeates all aspects. So take a look at education. In systems that obsess over standardized testing, children learn to memorize and avoid mistakes. Creativity and problem solving are often stifled. In healthcare, perfectionism can literally be deadly. It can kill. Doctors and nurses may avoid reporting errors for fear of punishment, for fear of termination, for allowing mistakes to repeat themselves instead of being corrected. I have seen this so many times that people will not self-report a problem because they just fear the consequences and they think that perfection is the standard. So then those mistakes will repeat themselves over and over. And who gets hurt? The patients who are there, who've placed their trust wholly in the healthcare team. Think of two different business cultures. In Silicon Valley, the mantra is fail fast, fail forward. So failure is expected as a part of innovation. Whereas in rigid bureaucracies, where error is punished, innovation stagnates. People stick to what they know to be safe, what they are familiar and comfortable with. There was a study by Curran and Hill in 2019 that warned us. It said, as societal perfectionism rises, so do rates of depression and suicide among young people. This is not just a private struggle, it is a public health issue. So if we wanted to move beyond perfectionism, the question is, what's the alternative? We all want to do the best we can. That's how we ended up with perfectionism, because we thought that that's the ultimate. But then what should be our orientation and approach if perfectionism isn't such a good idea? What's the alternative? If this perfectionism is a trap, what is the way out? The first solution is that we must adopt a growth mindset. Psychologist Carol Dweck, she has extensive work in this on this topic. She shows that people with a growth mindset see failure as feedback. Think about Michael Jordan, the celebrated basketball player of the Chicago Bulls, one of the greatest athletes of all time. He once said, "I have missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. I've failed over and over again, and that is why I succeed." So somebody like this, they think of failure as all of these failures as steps towards the ultimate goal of success. They don't think of failures as setbacks, but as necessary steps in doing this. We cannot, you don't come out of your mother's womb playing the violin. You have to fail and you have to generate so many notes that truly may be harsh on the ears of your family members until you can perfect those notes. Every single one of those failed attempts will be a stepping stone for you to eventually succeed. But if you want to give up completely at the outset, saying, this one note I can't get, I'm just going to throw the violin into the case and never open it again. Or, well, I placed last in this swim meet because I'm just not fast enough, I'm just not good at swimming. But this is just your third day being in the water. You are never going to become any swimmer, much less being a great swimmer. And so goes with anything else. There is a particular discipline that you pick a plan, you have a particular goal, and you are going to take the steps that get to that goal. And you understand that the pathway to that goal is not quite straight, that every setback is part of the process. So the word process here becomes key, because the second solution is we have to shift our focus from the outcome, for example, being a great violinist or a great swimmer, to process, which is every stroke that you make in the water and how that is going to propel you forward, or every move that you make on the bow, how it's going to generate the perfect note. Understanding that you are not going to get to the perfect note during the process, but the process is necessary to get there. So excellence is about iteration, not instantaneous flawlessness. Think of the Wright brothers, the ones that invented the modern day airplane. They crashed again and again. They had injuries because of these crashes, but it was their resilience, not perfection, that eventually gave us the ability to fly. They had to fail before they could succeed. That is part of the process. Iteration is far more important than being instantaneously flawless. They had no expectation that the first flying machine that they made was going to fly in North Carolina. That was just not the case. But they understood that process. If you give up at the first failure, then you would never have your name in history as the Wright brothers. The third solution is practical strategies. So what are these practical strategies to combat perfectionism? First is that you have to tier your standards. Not every task deserves 100% of your effort. Some things only need to be good enough. Just good enough to move forward. Imagine a new mother who wants to be the perfect mother to this baby. The perfect mother who manages the sleep and the feeding schedules, everything about this baby. This mother is going to lose it. Sometimes it's fine for the mother to say, I am going to do what is good enough. Because aiming for perfection means more sleepless nights for her, more stress and anxiety for her. At the end, she's not going to be the healthy mother to then take care of this child. So sometimes we have to lower certain standards based on their overall importance. We can tier them. Not everything needs to be 100%. Good enough is fine. This takes me back to what my mentor once said, the enemy of good is better. Sometimes if something is good, accept it as fact and move on and try to make other things good rather than making every good better. That is not necessarily needed. The other practical strategy is you have to reframe mistakes as experiments. Call them data points, not disasters. Because how you frame them is how your brain will be affected by the overall process. So your mistakes are experiments. You experimented, you failed. So many great discoveries happened because people made mistakes, and suddenly we had penicillin. Because if they were to do it exactly by the perfect methodology that they followed, Fleming would not be the discoverer of penicillin. Made a mistake, left the other plates outside. So mistakes sometimes are positives. They are part of our learning. They are our data points. Lastly, we have to practice self-compassion. There's a lot of self-hate that happens in the setting of perfectionism. You make one mistake and you are just devastated. Some of the people, you've seen it on the tennis court sometimes, they miss a shot and they literally will bang the tennis racket on the floor and they will hit themselves just to punish themselves for missing a shot. There is no need for this. A very reasonable person needs to have self-compassion. And so practicing self-compassion is an essential ingredient in battling perfectionism. The fourth approach in battling perfectionism is language shift. And I already alluded to it. Instead of saying, I can't fail, say, I can learn. Instead of saying, it must be perfect, you can say, I must move forward. It's about the process, it's about the flow. And this language is important. Words can be black magic or white magic. How we use them are very important in how we perceive ourselves. And so we have to be mindful of negative language that could plague our existence. Fifth is role models of excellence without perfection. The crux of the talk today is, instead of pursuit of perfection, pursue excellence. And there is a difference between that. I'm going to get to it. I mentioned Steve Jobs earlier. He launched the first iPhone with missing features and glitches. It wasn't perfect, but he refined it slowly, and it changed the world. Linus Pauling, a Nobel laureate, once said the best way to have a good idea is to have a lot of ideas. Imperfection is the soil where excellence grows. So instead of locking on this one idea that I'm going to just make it work, developing multiple ideas through your creativity and innovation may mean that suddenly one of them ends up taking off. But if you are locked in on one idea because you're a perfectionist and you have to deliver this idea to its destination, you may be in for a surprise. That may not necessarily work. So how can you have a good idea? Have many ideas and then pick from them. Perfectionism looks like a virtue, but it is really a cage. It limits growth. It strains relationships. It strains our health. It stifles our innovation. Excellence, approached with humility and curiosity, is the opposite of perfection. It is freedom. It is freedom to risk, like Pablo Picasso, who risked and created these, what appeared at the time, bizarre compositions on canvas, but then he captivated the hearts of the world. So it's the freedom to risk, the freedom to connect, the freedom to create. So I want to leave you with this reflection. Perfectionism is chasing a horizon you can never reach, whereas excellence is walking the path, learning with every step. So the innovation that you can have from pursuit of excellence will always trump the trap that perfectionism is. The invitation that I leave you with is simple. Don't ask yourself, was it perfect? Instead, ask, did I learn something? Did I grow? Did I move forward? Here are my final words. Perfectionism often disguises itself as a virtue, as a positive attribute. Yet, when we examine it closely, we realize it is a heavy chain that's placed around our mind. It traps us in endless cycles of comparison, fear of judgment, and the illusion that nothing is ever good enough. Instead of fueling our imagination, it suffocates creativity and it places exploration with hesitation and replaces our exploration and hesitation with joy and anxiety. The cost is not only mental, but it's also physical. Our bodies tighten, our shoulders tighten under the strain of perfectionism. The stress hormones will rise and they will flood our systems. And over time, we become more vulnerable to fatigue, to illness, and even burnout. Perfectionism convinces us that by controlling every detail, we can protect ourselves. But in truth, it makes us brittle, unable to bend and adapt to life's unpredictability. The irony is that when we chase the unattainable standard of perfectionism, we miss the beauty of the present moment and the lessons found in imperfection, such as wabi sabi, the age old tradition of celebrating imperfections in Japan. To thrive, our focus must shift from perfection to progress, from fear to curiosity, and from judgment to creativity. We must choose growth over rigidity and authenticity over performance, and embrace the liberating truth that our worth is not defined by flawlessness, but by the courage to create, to learn, and to live with an open heart.
Thank you so much, Dr. Misari, for such an enlightening presentation on a very simple term, perfectionism, that we all have been striving to reach. So today is the end of perfectionism and is the beginning of pursuit of excellence or growth. This was definitely a wonderful presentation that you broke down something so harmless as being pursuing perfectionism in life, and teaching us that what instead we need to pursue.